Hi, everyone. My name is Neil Silcox. I'm the Faculty Excellence Lead with the Maple League, and I'm really, really excited about today. This is the last session in our summer Better Together season. From research to classroom, challenging established narratives through multi-directional mentorship and course co-design. This is one of the first sessions that I set up when I was handed the Better Togethers, and it was one of the ones that I'm the most excited for. I want to take a moment to recognize that I'm speaking to you today from Chibuktuk, which has since been called Halifax, which is an unceded and unsurrendered Mi'kmaq territory, where I've just moved and where we live under the Peace and Friendship Treaty. This, in thinking about the session that we're about to see, I've been thinking about all the things that I was taught in university and all the ways that the things that I was told with certainty came perhaps from a really narrow point of view and how that limited me. And it made me think about a great quotation. While we're breathing, I just wanted to share this quotation, that living within, institutional racism is like breathing smog. Just because you know you're breathing it in doesn't mean it's not doing damage. And so I'll invite us not only to see the things that we know, but to really look today for the things that we don't know or we're uncomfortable about or that challenge our truths and our beliefs. With that being said, I'm very, very excited to throw things over to Linda Pearse. Linda, take it away.
Hi, Neil. Hi, everybody. I'm Linda Pearse. I'm a professor of music in the Department of Music at Mount Allison University.
Hello, I'm Kiran Steele. I'm a second-year percussion student at Mount Allison University.
Hi, I'm Emma Yee. I'm a second-year voice student who's also doing a double degree in history at Mount A.
And I'm Emma Cameron, and I'm a piano major heading into my 4th year at Mount A.
Okay, so here we go. So welcome, everyone. I just want to show you why we're so excited to be a part of the Better Together series. This is us being better together this summer. So despite the growing awareness of issues surrounding EDID in a broad spectrum of disciplines and fields, post-secondary music programs within Canada were oftentimes just rooted in European musical traditions to an extent that precludes the meaningful study of other musics. And it sometimes ignores the political and social context of music. We have several theoretical levers available that expose systemic barriers and inequalities, but we're still grappling with how to make meaningful changes within our courses, or at least I certainly am. English language music history textbooks prioritize historical narratives about European composers who are male. So we learn about the genius of Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, Mozart, Wagner, Mahler, and on, and they are wonderful, and I just adore their music. So we're not saying anything about that, but these narratives are supported by a musical canon that has become embedded within our historical understanding. So we position canonic works as natural and the most worthy of study. So to address just a small but meaningful, hopefully meaningful aspect of this issue, with Margaret Walker at Queen's and Sandra P. Boulian at Laval, we put together a larger research team of faculty and students. It comprises undergrads and grads that is supported by a SSHRC Insight Development Grant. So we are challenging these embedded narratives by creating a bibliography annotated with summaries with the aim of making alternative content and historical perspectives more accessible to educators and researchers and students. So adapting and changing the way we teach about music is a long-term project. I don't anticipate being done anytime soon. I will foreground my initial steps here that led to this current stage of course redesign. And then I'm going to hand it over to Kiran, Emma Yee, and Emma Cameron to explain their projects. So in pre-pandemic 2019 and 2020, I reconsidered the learning outcomes for my first year survey course of early art music. I wanted students to engage with early European music within its cultural context including a consideration of gender and colonialism. As well, I hope that students would develop an awareness of the historiography of early music, so the story of music, to think about how historical narrative is created and how language shapes the way we value certain musical scores and performances over others, the way we value written traditions over oral and improvisatory ones, the way we largely ignore the music making of women and people of color, and the way we do not account for the cultural and oftentimes colonial context of European music. So I'm not questioning if we should study European art music, I'm questioning how we study it and how we choose to study certain pieces over others. Okay, the new learning outcomes suggested a restructuring. So I started first with an intentional engagement with the liminal theoretical concepts of historiography, gender, and colonialism. And second, I wanted to include at least 50% content by other composers and musics, and to more seriously embrace oral and improvised music traditions. So this is the embarrassing part. In terms of content, my 2020 course iteration included just 5 works by women, so just 21% of the course content. And you'll notice there were no people of color, there were no other locations in there. So I wanted to instigate new narratives, to expose embedded narratives that might not be visible, and to test received narratives and to see how and if they changed with the altered content. With the input of colleagues and mentors, because I didn't have the bibliography at my hands that we are creating now, the 2021 course content did reach 50%. It included 6 works by women, 3 works plus several chants from non-European locations, a disability topic, and music from 2 specifically colonial locations. The students had flexibility with content and time management. For example, they had a 5-day window to complete assignments, and they could choose their own adventure and do just 3 of 5 assignments and decide which questions or tasks they would complete. So the assignments allowed for a deeper dive into EDID topics, and they enabled students to choose those directions that most interested them. So if somebody was interested in colonial music in Mexico, they could do that. And or if they wanted to focus on the disability topic, they could do that too. We used a variety of formats, partly also instigated by the pandemic, which I have found to be a really positive outcome of the pandemic. So we included videos and lecture segments, music listening, short scholarly readings, as well as score analysis. And outputs and activities included written reflections, breakout discussion groups, the creation of a wiki page. They could choose to do it alone or in pairs, and they had a multi-stage paper project. So the assignments were crafted not only to deepen knowledge and to cover information and forms and styles that we want them to learn about, but to encourage them to demonstrate their understanding of the theoretical frameworks. So for example, students reflected on the difference between medieval understandings of musical disability and their own after learning about a blind composer in the medieval period and listening to music that we have extant from that composer. So the results, the broader variety of content and the focus on the key theoretical frameworks meant that the class repeatedly addressed these concepts. So moving through the course, we came back to them, to the frameworks. So students spontaneously began to compare women's roles and experiences within class discussions and their papers, much more so than in the earlier iterations of the course. And it became clear that the standard genres and forms of music could be explained just as easily through women's music as through canonic pieces. The students' critical engagement with gender deepened over the arc of the course and went beyond historical biography and well into critical frameworks. But gender is a concept with which many of the students were already familiar with prior to taking the course. And gender was the most present EDID aspect within the course. So I wasn't too surprised by this intensity of engagement. And this is the more serious part. So this is where I say not everything was a great success. And the results indicated that implementing meaningful change is indeed a messy and long-term project, what Jessica Rydell would call a wicked problem. With historiography, the engagement did seem to reach a liminal space, though not for all students. So for example, many critically engaged with historiography within class discussions and in assignments. Some students were able to question the assumptions of different authors and point to other questions that arose from the readings. That was great. They demonstrated an awareness of authorial perspective or bias, which was really important in terms of developing critical reading skills. And this awareness bled through to some of their writing as well. With the concept of colonialism, however, engagement did not meaningfully cross, or if I'm honest, it didn't even near a liminal threshold. So colonialism was a new concept for many of the students, and I realized that I needed to intensify or rethink how to teach about colonialism and its intersections with music in order to reach a liminal space, a space that seemed so much more accessible to students with a concept like gender. So, as an instructor doing my own reflection, venturing away from the canon elicited equal parts excitement and fear. So for example, when I relegated Giovanni Gabrieli's polychoral music, which is a standard of the canon and some of my favorite music to teach with gorgeous sackbuts, when I moved it to the position of an optional assignment, I felt a very strong urge to switch it out with the music in colonial Mexico that had become part of the required content. In conversation with a student, however, I learned that Gabrieli's music just doesn't look that interesting. They really liked the pretty floral designs on the Mexican part books. And this feedback provoked a whole bunch of questions. So are we recreating this canon to serve our own needs as instructors? Or was I doing it to link myself to a historical pedagogical tradition? Are we taught as teachers to implement the system and narratives that we received as a measure of teaching success? These are the questions. In any case, I felt as if I had just jumped off a cliff, and I really hoped that the water below would be deep enough, but the students did not seem to mind at all. And for me, that appears to be a key takeaway. Students bring fresh eyes and minds to course redesign, and they should be involved in creating the education of the future, in conceptualizing what it means to account for EDID in our classrooms. And that realization fed directly into this project. Okay, so I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to pass the baton to my team members to talk about what we did this summer and to tell you about their completely awesome individual course redesign projects. Emma Yee and Kiran Steele were students in the early art music history course last semester, so in winter 2021, and Emma Cameron was the TA for the course.
So our first 2 weeks on this job were focused on training, which primarily consisted of us learning how to use our bibliographic software, Zotero, as well as developing and strengthening our research skills. On the first day, all 3 university groups, so Queen's, our group, and the one from Laval, got together to introduce ourselves and to hear Dr. Walker discuss the focus and methodology of the project. We then broke off to work in our respective university groups. Initially, our group met every day for between 1 to 3 hours to discuss issues of EDID and music history, research strategies, potential research focuses, and our end goals. We also had a few sessions with Anne LePage, the Mount Allison librarian, to discuss different library databases such as ProQuest, JSTOR, and Google Scholar, and how to use each one effectively. In the second week, our team did some exercises on summarizing, paraphrasing, and taking notes on articles. These exercises provided an opportunity for us to practice putting articles into our own words and demonstrate that we understood their contents. For our article summaries specifically, we got together to read them critically and offer feedback. The process was collaborative, so everyone could offer suggestions. Through reading our individual summaries as a group, we all learned how to improve their scope, precision, and structure. In other words, we got better at explaining the key points of an article in as few words as possible.
The next 4 weeks of our project comprised of reading, summarizing, plotting, and brainstorming. We used Zotero as our bibliography software because it allowed for peer mentorship. As you can see, this is the folder that we used where we collected sources and put in summaries, notes, as well as daily reflections. These were for feedback and encouragement and created an environment of peer mentorship. There was regular feedback from Dr. Pearse, and it also allowed us to track our methodology, tracking learning and new ideas, as well as answering questions. This also allowed Kiran and I to see some recognition of similar issues and findings. As you can see on the page, there is an example of some peer mentorship and feedback from the reflection. After that, we were able to have a free choice in order to choose an area of focus for meaningful research. Our guidelines were to stick between the years of 1500 to 1750 and to look at the themes of challenging existing narratives, looking at new narratives, and cultural exchange. Kiran chose to look at the narrative of raga music history in the Indian subcontinent. I looked at Qing and Ming dynasty cultural exchange between Chinese courts and Jesuit missionaries during the 16th and 17th centuries. And Emma Cameron looked at the non-written tradition of broadside ballad in Shakespeare's plays. We then worked on revising the course with our research. So first we located materials such as written and audio examples, manuscripts and print scores, as well as websites and blogs. We also consulted the Wendy Heller website and Inclusive Early Music Sources in order to find some more sources for this project. We then looked at how to connect it to the existing syllabus. As Dr. Pearse mentioned, Kiran and I took the course last semester, and Emma Cameron was a TA, so we all had some familiarity already with that syllabus. We worked on crafting an assignment and connecting overarching themes throughout the course, as well as learning goals that Dr. Pearse had created. This also offered more peer mentorship, as because Emma Cameron was a TA, she had experience in this, more so than Kiran and I. This is also an ongoing project. So at this point, we've planned out assignments, readings, and material, which we will continue to work on. And planning will continue in December of 2021, where we will see what exactly will be presented to the class, as well as making those assignments more precise and well put together. Then in the winter 2022 semester, in the second semester, first year early music history course, the three of us will each teach a class in that course. Then research will continue in summer of 2022, where we will have the opportunity to continue this bibliographic research and look at new topics or dive deeper into the ones that we've already looked at. I know I personally had a second topic that I was interested in, so I may do that, but we will just be continuing to do this work. So I will now pass it over to Kiran to talk more in depth about his project.
Yes, so I'm going to talk about how my research helped me to become more aware of my own biases towards Western European art music. Over the past year, I've been reflecting on my stances regarding various social issues, including racism, LGBTQ+ rights, and colonialism. The last of these issues has been on my mind since the previous winter, when I learned about it in the early art music history course. Before taking the course, my understanding of colonialism and its devastating effects was quite broad, but after taking it, I gained a deeper, though by no means complete, awareness of these subjects. I then furthered my understanding on colonialism and coloniality while working on this project, which led to me identifying and challenging some of my biases towards Western ideas. One idea I unlearned is the established prestige of Western European art music in Western society. When I was young, the idea that art musics from the Baroque, classical, and Romantic eras represent the peak of musical intellectualism was instilled in me without knowing it. I never realized the issues surrounding this idea until they were brought to my attention during my first few workdays. Not only that, these issues surfaced repeatedly while I researched raga musics in India, a topic I chose because I am partially Indian and I enjoy Indian music, especially the instruments. As I researched raga musics, I realized that the raga tradition is similar to the European art music tradition in that it dates back centuries, is discussed in numerous treatises, and has both established performance practices and a canon of works performed by contemporary musicians. However, a significant difference I noticed between the two traditions is that the European tradition relies on notated music, whereas the Raga tradition is predominantly oral. Thus, when I tried to find examples of notated Raga musics, I didn't find any. At first, I was frustrated by the lack of notated Raga musics, but after discussing my situation with Dr. Pearse and doing a bit more research, I learned that the Raga tradition places less emphasis on written music, and that the European tradition elevates written music over oral transmissions of music. I realized that by trying to find notated Raga musics, I was using the European tradition as the standard when evaluating the Raga tradition. I then realized that I wasn't using this standard for just written music. I was approaching other aspects of Raga musics, including pitch, rhythm, scales, and form, with a Western musical mindset. So after identifying my tendency to analyze non-Western musics using Western musical concepts, I sought to change how I learned about ragas. I made efforts to understand the music within its own context. So, to give some examples, I learned about Indian tuning systems and solfege and how they are applied in raga performance. I learned about several Indian instruments and their different roles. I learned about the musical properties of the raga, including its aro-avro, or the ascending-descending scalar pattern that forms the structure of a work, as well as tempi classifications, meters, rhythms, and the importance of establishing and developing melodic motives in performance. I learned about the aesthetic properties of ragas, including their associations with emotions, seasons, and times of day. I learned about how ragas have been categorized and are categorized throughout history. And as previously mentioned, I avoided searching for notated raga musics. When learning about ragas, I tried not to draw comparisons to Western musical concepts. Some of the articles I read made these comparisons, but only for a select few concepts, such as comparing Indian solfege to Western solfege, or Indian rhythmic classifications to Western classifications. None of the articles I read used Western music theory as the standard when evaluating Indian music theory. Overall, I'm very glad I explored raga musics as an isolated tradition. I approached the subject with a beginner's mind, and the lack of knowledge and preconceptions allowed me to better understand and appreciate the tradition than if I had been judging it from a Western perspective. This principle of researching non-Western cultures and musics with a beginner's mind is what will guide my historiographical and decolonial work going forward. The work I did this summer showed me that I have a long way to go in unlearning my biases towards Western ideas. However, I am ready to do the work. There are innumerable musical traditions around the world, and trying to discuss all of them using one set of criteria is, among other things, unhelpful, disrespectful, and inappropriate. My goal with doing this work is to understand people who do not share my life experiences and respect them and their musics for who and what they are. And I also hope to instill these ideas in others. When I teach my class on ragas in the early art music history course next year, I will emphasize the importance of understanding the music within its own context to the students. My hope is that through my instruction, the students will appreciate the raga tradition and its unique features, which in turn will show them how to understand music in a new way. I will now pass it off to Emma Yee to discuss her research.
Great. Going into this project, I was interested in learning about music perspectives outside of the Western classical tradition. During the early music history course last semester, I was pleasantly surprised by Dr. Pearse's dissection of the Western European art music narrative and introduction of the concept of presentism and the acknowledgement of these concepts when studying music history. The first couple of discussions with this research group continued to open my eyes on just how embedded colonialism is to the Western art music tradition. And as a double degree student in history, I often think about the way that different historical narratives were established and accepted. While it's easier to see different narratives from the outside, taking a step back to look at at my education allows me to analyze the way that my understanding of historical narratives has changed as I've gone deeper into my musical studies. For example, growing up learning music with the Royal Conservatory, as Dr. Pearse mentioned, all these great composers of Mozart, Bach, and Beethoven are kind of all that we have in that canon, and there has to be that knowledge that there are other musical narratives outside of that, such as the existence of this project. I was also interested in the way that political power can shape music and how music can be used as propaganda, which led me to look at a religious cultural exchange for political benefit. I will be considering Jesuit missionaries in Qing and Ming Dynasty China in order to discuss changing narratives and highlight differing perspectives of the same set of events. I want to offer a more well-rounded context for the cultural exchange between Europe and China at the turn of the 17th century. So through my reading, I noticed that scholarship changes according to the sources which historians have access to. For example, a lot of manuscripts and writings of Chinese literati and Jesuit missionaries are still held in the Beijing National Library, which is not open to international scholars, so Western scholarship does not always consider Chinese perspectives. While I thought that a comparative article from 1992 would be comparing the Kangxi Emperor and Louis XIV on equal footing, it placed Louis XIV as the familiar and the norm to which the Kangxi Emperor either agreed or differed. The Kangxi Emperor was identified through this process as an other, as different or exotic. And while it's somewhat detailed in Western music history articles, Chinese music from the 16th and 17th century is only described from the perspective of these Jesuit European missionaries, and often negatively due to the Western European art music framework. For example, Chinese music is always dissonant, and its progression was halted by the Kangxi Emperor's backwards ways, and there's no other perspective of Chinese music offered. While this information is useful, it's clearly from a European perspective, which prompted me to search for other perspectives. By reading more recent articles, I was able to see the way in which scholarship has shifted using expanded sources that include Chinese writings, balancing perspectives, and writing from a different framework. Recent research seems to have a greater awareness of local cultural contexts and perspectives that put European understanding in dialogue with the perspectives of another culture. Source access has grown. There's Chinese literature scholarship in English, where authors demonstrate fluency in both English and Chinese and draw on both European and Chinese language sources, providing greater depth of perspective. For example of one of these sources, while the Jesuit Matteo Ricci's music and the Italian words are lost, the Chinese words to this music are available and worthy of consideration. With primary sources used in these publications, historical writings from Chinese literati on Western music is used and analyzed, as well as letters from Jesuits, and these two perspectives are balanced. Additionally, the framework of the writing changes. Instead of positioning Western music and knowledge as normative, themes of cultural exchange are used that promote a conversation and engage with each type of music on its own terms. For example, scholars use different Asian countries with varying degrees of colonization to compare how European music was disseminated and or accepted in these spaces. They're able to show a larger political economic movement, which is how I wish to convey themes connecting the material I showcase with the students of the early music course next year. In conclusion, I learned to analyze historical narratives and the author's individual writing and arguments, which allow me to look more critically at the sources I read. In this process, I also noticed a shift in scholarship towards musical narratives with multiple perspectives, which, like in our course co-design, work towards larger themes that can be explored by linking different historical narratives. I will now be turning it over to Emma Cameron to talk about her project.
Great, thanks, Emma. So as we've mentioned previously, a large part of our focus this summer has been directed toward a restructuring of the curriculum in the early music history class at Mount Allison. This summer, I had an independent student research grant funded by the J.E.A. Craik Foundation, and the focus of my research was Shakespeare's use of the broadside ballad in 3 comedies, which were written right around 1600. This research overlapped with the Embedded Narratives project because the broadside ballad is an oral tradition, and oral tradition has been overlooked in the canon quite frequently in favor of written compositions. When we began to talk about restructuring the course, I proposed that the broadside ballad be included in the week which focuses on English song and discusses written English compositions from the late 16th and early 17th centuries, so about the same time as the broadside ballads. My rationale was that including music from oral tradition depicts more accurately the very vibrant musical culture of England during this time. In my portion of this presentation, I will outline the type of English song currently included in the early music history class and juxtapose that with the broadside ballad. So at the moment, the early music history course centers around the English song of composers who were employed by the elite of England's social hierarchy. This emphasis generates a focus on two musical forms, the English madrigal and the lute song. The madrigal is of Italian origin, and it's a setting of a non-repetitive poem, song, or sonnet, which is sung, set for many voices, so there are many layers of complex harmony. For instance, Thomas Wilkes's As Vesta Was from about 1601 is often a part of early music history syllabi. The second musical form is the lute song, which is another form of secular vocal music, and it was represented in last winter's early music history course by John Dowland's Flow My Tears from about 1600. Although these compositions are deservedly recognized as important musical contributions, they represent only one facet of the vibrant musical culture of early modern England. So a counterpoint to the madrigal and the lute song is the broadside ballad. Broadside ballads take their name from the broadsheet, or large folio sheet of paper on which they were printed, and the text of the ballad and a woodcut image are usually printed on the page. Interestingly, no musical notation is printed on broadside ballads from this time period, and instead a brief reference, usually a short sentence to the tune of blank, provided the audience with the necessary knowledge to replicate a performance. This practice testifies to a widespread knowledge of ballad tunes, and it shows their prominent role in the oral musical culture of early modern England. However, the lack of notation also creates gaps that caused issues in my research because there are so many unknowns. How is this music performed, with or without accompaniment? If so, what instruments or how many voices were used? Many broadside ballad tunes also haven't survived. So although some scholars have reconstructed them based on extensive research, we don't have certain knowledge of them. When I came to write my paper, I also had to struggle with what language can we use to analyze this music, because it would be anachronistic to use 19th century analysis. While many broadside ballads haven't survived 400 years, some ballad tunes are still extant because they were included in manuscript collections compiled by the elite, or because they were worked into dance music or used as hymn tunes, like the tune Green Sleeves, which may be familiar. From these surviving tunes, we are able to glimpse their structure. And this structure supports an oral performance practice because they are short and very simple. Broadside ballads are strophic, which means that each verse of text repeats the same melody. As well, repetition of rhythms or melodic fragments within a ballad tune results in further repetition. And as ballads are frequently dozens of verses long, the ballad tune is repeated many times, which causes it to become very quickly familiar. Although these traits are a contrast to the rhythmic, harmonic, and structural complexity of the madrigal and the lute song, this juxtaposition also demonstrates the diverse levels of musical life in early modern England. So discussion of oral tradition and the broadside ballad reveals the popular music tradition in Elizabethan society, which is another facet of a richly varied musical culture. From this research into the broadside ballad, I have gained new understanding of the depth of oral tradition and the terminology and the language involved in analyzing early music. In the early music history course, the broadside ballad could be studied in dialogue with the madrigal and the lute song, and combined with these canonical works, understanding of this popular tradition would perhaps lend students a more nuanced understanding of the very vibrant musical culture of early modern England.
Okay, thank you, everyone. That was just a wonderful presentation. You all did wonderfully. Neil, we're done. I just want to add maybe that it was the highlight of my summer to work on this project with all of you. We had a lot of fun, so thanks.